conference going?
Taking the courses, I mean, taking the topic.
Okay. I don't know, water and it's not. Okay. I'm ready.
Assalamualaikum everyone.
Waalaikumsalam.
Inshallah you guys are all doing well. Thanks for making it out tonight to the second session of this course, Sacred Activism, and we thank Dawood for just taking this time out for offering this class to us. And I believe everyone here at least knows of the class or at least attended and completed the first session. But we're really grateful to have this opportunity, and it's a very relevant topic that we all actually presented from in terms of guiding our work and keeping it on the path of keeping Oprah. And about, I think we all know Imam Dawood and his work, and a lot from this text that, I mean, I can speak, if you don't mind me speaking personally about it, I believe, from his own lifelong work, serving our community, as well as his studies, take this, into account of what, we're going to be learning here today. And for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Imam Dawood is also the executive director of CARE Michigan. He also serves on the National Board for Medical Certification Initiative, and he's a, national activist. So he could definitely speak to the topic that we're addressing today, sacred activism. And I won't waste any more time. And I'll hand it over to Imam Dawood to start the class.
السلام عليكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه وأما بعد. First of all, let me say that it's a pleasure to be here with you this evening. For those who are here and also for those who are watching this live streaming. And we had a good first session at Masjid Wali Muhammad with our beloved teacher, Imam Zayd Shakir Hafidullah, where we went into an introduction, at least from his perspective on this topic, towards sacred activism, in which we were fortunate that in this book, he wrote the foreword towards sacred activism, but besides him speaking, and I think of the imams and teachers who served our community over the decades, I could say that Imam Zayd is probably the best one that we have in our community that really exemplifies being a scholar activist, being a traditional scholar in Islam, but also organizing around issues of justice and speaking out and being a moral and balanced voice. So with that, this is the second class of towards sacred activism. And unlike how you hear me speak on the minbar, I'm going to be more deliberate and slow in how I discuss things and what we Imam Siraj Hajmut, inshallah. So, and this is a funny discussion too as well. It's not like as if I'm going to be lecturing the entire time all the way through. If you want to raise your hand, like some clarification for something, a source that I quote, or if I, prompt you to ask, if I pose a question for you to answer, then inshallah we all participate in this. So let's go over why we are here, why you are here, what you'll learn, and how you'll learn it. So this is what we are going over in the next coming class. And so let's start with the why. I think it's very important for you to understand class, which is the first chapter in this book. So, just to be very candid with you, I've spoken about this one time, naming the organization. Other times I've been vague in discussing about what prompted me to write this book. So, about 8 or 9 years ago, I was in a cohort of something called the American Muslim Civic Leadership Initiative, or AMACU. It's hosted through the University of Southern California. There is one lady who is the brainchild behind it, who's not a Muslim, and there's another lady who was involved in it with the organizing, who is a Muslim of a Syrian background. So I was in that cohort. It was about it was a 9-month cohort, a fellowship, I should say, that cohort. And what I saw taking place about 8 years ago was a trend I've seen in activist circles that have snowballed. And I said after that meeting that this needs to be addressed. And I talked to a number of scholars, a number of teachers, males and females, about what I saw. And a number of things about what I saw were not addressed. And it leads us to where we are today, where I believe the predominant form of activism in the American Muslim community, especially when it's around so-called social justice activism, it is occupied in spaces by Muslims who are very sincere, well-meaning, well-intended about standing for justice, but their predominant framework of how they see social justice or justice in general is really a secular framework. The worldview really comes from secular liberalism, whether they realize it or not. And this philosophy of Western liberalism is so pervasive that we really don't know how it has affected us as Muslims, especially those of us who've been born and raised in the West. And when I say secular liberalism or Western liberalism, this term liberalism does not mean Democrats or political liberals or so-called progressives. No, people who are Republicans are also fall under this philosophy of secular liberalism, where the rights of the individual trump the rights of the collective, and then also within this framework, within this epistemology, there is a separation between the so-called profane from the sacred, right? Or one can have a religious life, and then they also have a secular life, right? So this is part of what I feel is a big problem, a big challenge, and this is part of what prompted me of writing this book. And hence, I think that all of us, when we are engaged in this endeavor, and as I wrote in the introduction of this book, I welcome critique, I welcome challenge of what I've written, but it is really a call that we be change makers in our circles of influence, right? In terms of people who we are engaging with, who are activists in the community, and we all should be active in the community and bringing about good and positive change, right? But also for our youth, our middle school, high school age, even those people who are in university, that we share and perhaps help challenge the current frameworks, the current nomenclature, vernacular that is used inside of activism spaces and how we can approach certain issues. So the what is again in this class, we will be going over specifically definitions and nomenclature. And this is part of the Islamic tradition, by the way. And if you ever have the opportunity to study usul fiqh formally, or the foundations of Islamic jurisprudence, you'll see that before any topic is discussed, you'll see two things. You'll see before the topic is elucidated on, you will see firstly, words will be defined so that everyone is starting from the same page. And the definitions go two ways, and I mentioned this last week. There's first a lughawi definition, meaning a linguistic definition. there will be an operational definition. So, and we'll get into this in two classes, but let's say the word el-amr, like means a command, all right? So then the usuli scholars would say, okay, a command or enjoining, so then what is the root of el-amr, amara, right? And then it would go through, how does this apply operationally to enjoining good, for instance, el-amr bil-ma'ruf. So this is what scholars do in relationship to usul fiqh, and I basically, for anyone who studies usul fiqh, they will clearly see that the chapters I went through, like defining what is justice, or what is el-ma'ruf, what is good, or what is munkar, what is evil, what is injustice. I followed the same trajectory that you would see in any book on usul fiqh from any of the madhab, right, from any of the madhab. Okay, we will also go through some objectives as well as guardrails. Inshallah, during the classes we will try to invoke some real life circumstances, right? So everything is just not going to be, inshallah, just things that are, what we would say, hypothetical, right? We will try to bring forth some things, and we will do that tonight, inshallah. The how, of course, be engaged in this conversation. This is not just me preaching, but please listen, be engaged, and this is interactive, inshallah. And I hope through the remainder of the classes that you all interact, and you can even feel free to challenge me on anything that I bring forward. So today's class is what is justice, and just to give you a preview of what's going to be taking place for the next classes is, after this one is the obligation of justice activism. I use social justice activism in the book, and it's used right here, but actually proceeding and going forth for the class's benefit, I'm going to explain why I think that we should actually abandon this term, social justice activism. I'll explain why, and I will, of course, give an alternative, right, when I deconstruct it. But I use it for the sake of this, just as well, as we go through, you'll see another subject while I plan on deconstructing that as well. The prerequisites for enjoying the good and forbidding the evil will be the following class, or el-amr bil-ma'ruf, or nahy anil munkar. Then next, the etiquettes or comportment, or we can say the adab of enjoying the good and forbidding the evil. And we will also define what adab is, because it means more than just manners. Entering into coalitions, what's the difference between allyship and coalition? Or what is the difference between allies and coalition partners, right? From taking Quranic definitions. Wading through contentions of engagement, and this engagement, and I left off the letters, but this is relating to so-called LGBTQ, so-called. And I'll go into the reason why, though it was listed in this book. I use LGBTQ just as a beginning part so people will know what I'm talking about. But I actually think we should avoid, in our public discussions, repeating these alphabets. So actually keep growing as LGBTQI and something else, and there's so many, right? There may be more, every alphabet may be used before we know it. No, I'm not exaggerating. And then we will go through the issue of spiritual self-care. Like, people talk about self-care as far as getting enough sleep, exercising, eating the right way. Well, what about spiritual self-care, right? How can we nourish ourselves so that we don't get swept away in the waves of secular thought, stay grounded, but also some suggestions of not getting burned out. You'll see that many people in the activist community get burned out. I know of some counter activists who've actually had major fits of anxiety and had to actually be hospitalized. You know, some of the big major ones. Like I know from this background, I deal with them, right? So how can we avoid these things, or deal with these things? So now let's get to what is justice. And as many of our scholars say, that in many cases, how we understand a term can best be defined by knowing its opposite. right? Like, for instance, you really wouldn't know what sweetness is unless you tasted something bitter. And we even have traditions about this in Islam and in a hadith that relate to this, right? Like juxtaposing honey with vinegar, for instance, right? Or how do we know, how do we truly know what cold is if we haven't experienced some heat, right? So it's kind of like this comparison. So this is from Kitab Tahrifat by Sharif Ali bin Muhammad al-Jurjani. He's a very well-known scholar of Arabic language as well as what we would call tasawwuf. I don't like using that term, Sufism, because how Westerners deploy the term Sufism, they try to strip it from its core, which relates to Sharia, right? And Imam Ahmed al-Rifai, rahmatullahi alayhi, one of the great Arifin billah, he said that every path or every tariqah is cut off if it is not correct connected to Sharia. So we don't believe in any goofy Sufi stuff and you can just, twirl around but don't pray. You don't respect the halal and haram, but you say you reach haqiqah. That has nothing to do with Islam. And that's not even, that is not tasawwuf, right? So he says, and I wrote it in Arabic for you that you can, with the page number, page 148, but al-dhulm, meaning injustice, is when a thing or a shay is put other than its proper place. And a shay, brothers and sisters, in Islam, a shay relates to something that's created. It's like Allah says, "Laysa kamithlihi shay," right? And there is nothing, and He is not comparable to a shay, to a thing. Anything that a shay is created. So it is saying in this ayah of Quran, for those obviously who know this, but literally it's saying, and Allah is not a creation, He's not a shay. And anything that is a shay can be confined to a place and time. Anything that is shay is halak. It will end. It will destroy. It will be destroyed. It will be ruined. So Allah is not a shay. And as Sayyidina Ali, Karamallahu wajhah, he said of Allah, can Allah wa la makan, that Allah was and is. He always will be, and He is not in a location. He can never be confined to a location. So we don't say in traditional Islam that Allah is up in the sky. Well, Allah walked in Detroit in the year 1930 in the person of a man by name Farrar Muhammad. Right, that's not our thing. So injustice. Now, let's look at the word justice itself from a Quranic definition. So, in Arabic, the word for justice that is used in books of fiqh would be al-adala. 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 Alif, lam, ain, dal, alif, lam, tamabuta. Al-adala. Al-adala is also related to another word that relates to justice, adl. And al-adl is one of Allah's beautiful names, one of al-asma al-husna, and it's mentioned in many books, all right, of Allah's beautiful names. So to cut through the chase, relating to this issue, that firstly, al-adl, or God's name, it means that He is the just, but it means more than this. And one of these relates back to this definition of what is zulm. So it is Allah who is the one who placed the balance of everything in creation. It is Allah is the one who placed the balance of everything in creation. This is the first. And Allah created everything zawjain, meaning in pairs and mates. There's a masculine and a feminine expression. And one of the beautiful things about Arabic language, the language of the Quran, there is no neuter. There is no gender neutral. There is no unisex. Like al-Ma'idah is feminine, ends in tamabuta. And nafs, soul, or also can be translated ego, is feminine. So the Quran says nafsun wahida. So there's a feminine one that comes after nafs. So we know that nafs is feminine, right? So there is no gender non-conformity, even in the language of the Quran. There's no such thing as gender non-conformity, right? Everything has a gender assigned. So there's Allah who placed the balance of everything. And in the creation, there are jalali and jamali traits, right? Those things that are imminent, right? Majestic, and then those things that exude beauty. Jalali and jamali. Jalali and jamali. So it's Allah who's the one, and He mentions this in Surah Al-Rahman in the beginning of Surah Al-Rahman, and Allah says that He is the one that placed everything in the balance, right? In its proper proportion. In the mizan, or what bil qist, right? With justice. So this is Allah. He placed everything in its proper balance. He is the one who set this creation in its proper balance, and the planets never run each other, and they go in their orbit, and they don't go outside of the balance or the laws that Allah has set for these. And this is how we can tell, according to the solar calendar, when the sun is going to rise, when the sun is going to set. Like our prayer charts, we can tell by this balance and through calculation. We know when the sun rose in 1979. We know when the sun rose today. And if there is a world 40 years from now, by Allah's permission, then we can predict or know when the sun's going to rise on this exact same day 40 years from now. So Allah set everything in its proper place, in its proper balance. But now more specifically to human beings, Allah is Al-Adil. And it is Allah who put everything in their proper places as He intended them to be in. So justice, how does justice look like firstly? From a Shari perspective, and Ibn Qayyim mentioned this, the Hanbali scholar, and I have this reference in the book. Actually, the saying of Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, al-Hanbali, actually can be traced back to a statement attributed to Sayyidina Ali. Right? It is that when justice is relating to people or the social world, when people are given their rights as Allah intended them to be in, when people are given their just due and their rights as God intended them to be in, then this is justice. Right? This is justice. Even in the founding document of this country, so before the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which is actually the law, and we have an attorney sitting in here who can explain it better than I can. But before that, actually we have more than one attorney here. Excuse me. The Declaration of Independence was the first document written for this country and its establishment, right? When the so-called founding fathers made khuruj, like they had an uprising, they rebellion. And what they say in that Declaration of Independence written by Thomas Jefferson. And we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. And among these are life, liberty, and the happiness. So even in this document, it is an acknowledgement that ultimate rights and justice come from the divine, they don't come from people. They come from the divine, they don't come from people. So, when people are extended and given their rights, as Almighty God intended them to have and to operate in society, and this place is Sharia, this is a Shari definition. When those are extended, that's justice. When people are denied those things, that's zulm. Is there rights being denied that God gave, that Almighty God gave? Now another name that relates to justice is al-haq. Al-haq. Al-haq is the truth. Al-haq is the reality. And huquq al-insan, human rights come from al-haq. Huquq al-insan. Shall we say in Arabic, or you read in some Islamic texts, you'll see human rights. Huquq al-insan. Huquq al-insan are derived from al-haq. And this is also one of the differences that our beloved martyr, as Dr. Omar said, Omar from Abdullah, may Allah preserve him, when he said that Malcolm X is like our Imam Hussein of America. He said it's a tahrif. He said that Malcolm X is like our Imam Hussein in America. Why? Because actually Malcolm X's life is so deep. But what Malcolm X said years ago is that there's a difference between civil rights and human rights. Human rights are given by God. They transcend place and time and nation-state boundaries. Civil rights are given by governments, and they can be denied. And a country can recognize a human right as a civil right. Likewise, a country can make something a civil right that is not an absolute human right. Civil rights and human rights are not synonymous. Governments, likewise, can deny something as being a civil right that, in fact, is a human right. So those things aren't the same for us. And as I've said over and over again in my work at CARE, that legality did not equal morality. Legality did not necessarily equal morality. Something can be legal and be moral. Something can be legal and be just according to a Shari'i definition. Or something can be propagated, or someone can say, oh, I can't do this, I can't do that. This is not just, this is injustice. Well, maybe that thing that you're calling injustice, maybe isn't injustice. Right? So that's something very important for us to get to and to get down to. Now, let's continue. So I mentioned Shari'i. So I gave a Shari'i definition. Now, all justice issues aren't just simply Shari'i. And our beloved teacher, Dr. Sherman Abdul Hakim Jackson, has talked about this a number of times and written about this. So we have Shari'i rules or regulations. Some of these rules or regulations that we have are from what are called qati'at. Those things are binding. Those things that Allah Azza wa Jal clearly commanded, right? In what is called nusus in the text. It is the Quran, and then we also know those things that we can authenticate the speech of our beloved Prophet Muhammad alayhi salam. Because we know our Prophet alayhi salam did not speak from his own hawa, didn't speak from his own desires, his own whims. What he said and what he mentioned is something being legislated, something that should not be done, for instance, something that's forbidden. We take this as a type of wahi, a type of revelation, right? Not unless the Quran or his speech abrogated that. And there's a whole science about this called an-nasakh wa mansukh. There's a whole science about this issue, and there's some differing things about this amongst the madhab. But we have things that are clearly shari'i in our deen, certain things that shouldn't be done, right? And then under an Islamic ran country, there can also be certain punishments that are prescribed according to the Quran, Sunnah, or extracted from nusus by the ulama, in which scholars have had ijma' or consensus of that, right? So, for instance, I'll just give an example. Brunei, a few months ago, the small country in Southeast Asia, said that they're going to implement hudud laws according to Sharia. I mean, it's a Muslim majority country, where they're going to institute punishments for fornication as well as for sodomy, right? As zina, what we want. Okay? These punishments that they brought forth are Shari'i, punishments based upon Shari'i prohibitions. Unfortunately, our Muslim congresswoman actually put a resolution in Congress calling these hudud, calling this hudud backwards and savage, and wanting to put sanctions on a Muslim majority country. But see, this is just language of Western secularism that she invoked, and also talking points from ironically, from the same Islamophobes that attack her, right? Ironically. But this is falls under Sharia issues of justice, and obviously, in the United States of America, this is a moot issue because we can't implement any punishments, such as like for defamation or defamation. There's one example. There's a punishment under the Sharia. Actually, a lot of Muslims knew that they go around defaming people, they get 40 lashes with a whip. I think that would slow down a lot of this nonsense on Facebook and some of these blog posts. Right. Right. I'm trying to keep it real for you. Right? No, but seriously, if you read Dawan al-Kubra, for instance, by Imam Malik, you'll see there's a clear punishment for al-Qaf, or defamation. Oddly, the former country, that brings forth this point, the former tyrant of Libya, al-Qaddafi, his name and its root relates to the word of someone who slanders and defames people. It's like, it's Akid, it's weird. Right? So this is things relate under the Sharia. So, but then there are also things that are non-Sharia, right, that also inform justice, right? Can inform justice, right? So, as is told by some of our scholars, we have the text, and this is Sharia, which defines for us what is justice. Then there's a lower layer, and this is non-Sharia, right, where people of sound thinking, or it's called uqul, sound thinking, they come together and they see something that is not clearly legislated in our text of sacred law, but that would help bring about something for the common good, or to deter something that would cause harm. Then this would be something that's a non-Sharia way of understanding justice, right? That could be relating to policy, public policy, or law. So I'll give you an example. Speed limits. You're not going to find anything in classic books of fiqh. You're not going to find al-Bayhaqi in his writings around Shafi fiqh, or Muhammad al-Shibani and Abu Yusuf and Hanafi fiqh, right? Or al-Mudawwana al-Kubra, or the Masail of Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, or the Musnad of Zayd ibn Ali. Like, you're not going to find anything about speed limits, right? There's nothing that you're going to find in any, like, nusus or sacred text that specifically talking about there needs to be speed limits in Islam. But we have speed limits. And if someone breaks the speed limit, then they are breaking the law, and thus are committing a type of form of injustice. Why are there speed limits? Why do we have in a residential neighborhood that there's 25 miles an hour? Why can't someone go 70, 75 miles an hour, like on Interstate 95? We have two things in the Sharia that are the maqasid, or the objectives of our sacred law, but we don't have clear nusus on this. Do you know your name is Bazan? What's your name? Bazan. Can you tell me why would it be important to have speed limits, and if someone is like speeding 70 miles an hour through a residential neighborhood, why would this be a type of wrongdoing? Because dhulm means injustice, it also means wrongdoing, right?
Because it's not safe for the residents of the neighborhood, and people usually walk around, and there's a lot of moving parts in this.
Okay, that's one reason. She said because it's not safe. So in other words, it could cause harm. So hizbul nafs is a principle of how we understand justice. It's the protection of life, right? It's the protection of life. So if someone's speeding through there, they can hit a kid that's playing, or hit someone else. They could seriously hurt someone, could handicap someone, could even kill someone. Right? You know of another reason? Anyone? Another reason? Besides the protection of life? Property. Very good. Hizbul mal is also a principle for us. Right? and we have certain principles that are in our maqasid, right? With the objectives relating to justice. We have the protection of life, the protection of religion, hizbul-deen, the protection of property or wealth, hizbul-mal, hizbul-nasl, right, of our prosperity, and hizbul-ibn, right? So we have five of these objectives. So speed limits aren't shari'i per se, according to what we would call the sharia or sacred law. But these are issues like, I'm just trying to like paint a picture for you how we like look at this process of this issue of justice. However, we can't say that something non-shari'i trumps something for us that is shari'i. So for instance, we can't say, oh well, this is completely condemned in the Quran. It's completely impermissible, right? But we're going to bring up some sort of like, out of the sake of so-called maslaha, or for the common good, we're going to then institute something and encourage something that is prohibited by the Sharia. Okay? Because some people make these arguments, right? Like I heard these arguments quite a bit. Unfortunately, we've had like 6 people in the country die recently from vaping. And it's not from nicotine, from THC. But we have Muslims saying, oh, we need to fight for legalization of smoking THC and cannabis and hashish and all these types of things. They took it as a justice issue. And they said, oh, well, it's mass incarceration, and we need to, in order to get rid of mass incarceration, we need to legalize THC. And this is a problematic, even in mass incarceration is even a problematic argument, even from like a non-shari'i secular. If one were to look at the stats of who actually is incarcerated for nonviolent drug offenses, and what is that primary drug? It's not THC, right? It's crack, an unfair crack sentencing that took place with the so-called war on drugs escalated by President Ronald Reagan, right? So that's not even exactly correct, right? But why not make hashish a civil offense? It could be decriminalized, but made a civil offense like a parking ticket, right? Like a traffic ticket. Doesn't mean it needs to be legalized. It could be sold and then eventually mass marketed. So it decriminalizes it from people doing long jail sentences if they're caught with light possession. At the same time, it's still not legalized, because once the state legalizes something, it is like it is socially acceptable, and then the state then actually begins to profit off the legalization through taxes. So it's giving de facto permissibility and acceptability, right? So, but we just need to think through things. Any pushback about that? No? Challenge me. I had a lot of people challenge me about that when I told people to vote no against legalizing marijuana in November on the ballot. And they say, I was like, I don't know what's going on. I'm a dogmatic uncle and all that stuff. Yeah, I'm an uncle now.
I think people maybe need to have a definition as to why shari'i, that is, considered
Yeah.
binding.
Yeah, and I think that leads to more education. And I think the reality of it is, this is going back to well-meaning people and why we had this class and other classes, is that people are sincere, but they haven't been given a shari'i compliant framework. And as I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned it at the last Pastor Mahant, but I mentioned it before. One of my old teachers, maybe he died about 2 years ago. I remember having over 20 years ago, I remember him looking at me and putting his hand on my shoulder. We were going over the hadith in the middle. I'm not going to be yet. Actions of my intentions. This hadith mutawatir. It's one of those, as well as a hadith that we must believe it without a doubt. It's so widely narrated, it is completely beyond doubt. He looked at me and he said, Dawood, you should remember, you can be sincere and be sincerely wrong. Like, sincerity and feelings is not our measurement. Where I have there some red flags, which was the next slide. Feelings alone does not equal justice. You feel something should be a certain way, and if it isn't, it is injustice. That is not our parameters. It's not our parameters. And that's what's going on a lot in the so-called social justice circles today. There's a lot of feelings. A lot of it's just based on feelings. So let's go through some terminology again. I talked about towards sacred activism. Let's go to this term sacred. We're talking about the Sharia and defining of justice, right? Let's take a step back. We're talking about justice as being something sacred for us. What is sacred? The word sacred in Arabic is hurma. Hurma. It's linguistically related to haram. Like al-masjid al-haram, the sacred masjid. Or haram. Haram. So let's paint a picture. A haram has boundaries. You go to Medina, go to Haram and El Medina, Masjid al-Nabi. You go into El Masjid al-Aqsa, the Haram. You go into El Masjid al-Haram, which is the most sacred masjid. There's a Haram area. And what is this? It means that there are certain physical boundaries, but there's also certain spiritual and behavioral boundaries within these precincts, within these boundaries. That there are certain things that should be done, and there are certain things that should not be done. And who set these parameters of what should be done and shouldn't be done? It's the divine. It's God who is the one that set these parameters and is the one that made this sacred, either through divine revelation through his book or off the lisan of the rest of creation. Khairul khalq ilahi Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi. Right? So things are to be engaged in their proper places, in their boundaries. And again, when things are not engaged correctly in their proper boundaries or taken outside their boundaries, that is zulm. That is zulm is injustice or wrongdoing. Right? And something can be good, but engaged the wrong way, and thus then can become zulm. And not inherently evil. I'll give you an example. It's like Muslims sometimes we freak out over pigs. We freak out over the khinzir. Khinzir, swine is a creation of God. Pigs aren't evil. Pigs serve a created purpose. They have their nature, and they act in obedience according to their nature. God created them, and he created them for a reason. So pigs aren't inherently evil. Now, if we deal with pigs in a certain way, starting with eating pig, unless we are starving to death, because we're given that rukhsa, if we aren't starving, or let's say, I don't like eating eggplant, like I'm using myself as an example, I don't like eating eggplant. Like if there's a pork chop and eggplant, I have to eat the baba ganoush, even though I dislike eating eggplant, right? But my point is, to eat pork without a valid reason is taking outside the proper boundaries that Allah created for us of how we can or cannot engage swine, pork. So if I eat it, I then commit zulm. But it's zulm to myself, right? It's zulm to myself. Now, activism, there's different forms of activism, right? Everyone doesn't have to be a full-time activist or do it for a job, but it is to be active. And being active in one society and respecting the sacred boundaries of parameters. So we all in our own ways are activists. And if you're not protesting or writing an editor or calling your congressman, even giving to a positive cause for social change is a type of activism. Like everyone didn't have to be on the front line or be on the streets, right? There are some Sahaba who were trained with the sword, and they were more adept with the sword, and then there were other people like Abdurrahman ibn Auf who just had a lot of money, just gave. Then you had special people like Abu Bakr Siddiq who was talented with the sword and gave all his wealth. See, that was just, or Umar al-Khattab, or Ali ibn Abi Talib. Those are different types of people, right? Those are stellar people. But sometimes being involved in bringing about positive change, oh, I can't do this. I'm busy doing this. I have my job. I can look after my wife and my children, look at my husband and the children, blah, blah. But you know something? Every year, I run a $5,000 chicken kill machine. Or any other like positive cause, right? Think about some positive good. It doesn't have to be KMC's as an example. It could be Iman with like Rami Nashashidi. It could be Taiba Foundation with Sheikh Rami and so on. Right? It could be a number of different organizations that are involved in activism that are trying to help people relating to justice or people who've been marginalized in society, right? Now, al-dhulm, as we mentioned, is taking things outside their proper places that Allah intended them to be in. There are 3 different stages of dhulm. There are 3 different darajat. The first is, of course, a shirk. And Allah calls this, and this is the advice that Luqman alayhi salam gave to his son. It is what? It is dhulm azim. It is the greatest form of oppression. It's the greatest form of wrongdoing. Now this form of dhulm doesn't harm Allah in the least bit. Allah cannot be harmed by anything or anyone. It's part of His transcendency. And that Allah is not a shade. Something that is shade can be harmed. Allah is not a shade. It's completely shade. This is the first form. Second form is if we transgress someone else's rights. This is a type of zulm against another person. This is the second most detrimental form of zulm. And the third form is when someone does wrong to their own self. Someone does wrong to themselves by not adhering to the commandments of Almighty God and His Messenger, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in those personal matters or personal affairs. Like if one doesn't make salah, for instance. If one doesn't fast the month of Ramadan. Doing harm to oneself. Now, a question for you. Why do you think doing harm to someone else, and by the way, all 3 of these sins actually harm the person that does it. Everyone who does this, all three of these, whoever commits it is a dhalim or a dhalima in this sense. Right? Because a shirk doesn't harm Allah, but it harms the person who's involved in it. And a shirk also has 2 layers. There's outward shirk, like al-wathaniya, like idolatry. And then there's ariya, right? A shirk al-khafi, or a shirk al-asghar. Right? This is the lesser shirk. Doing things for worship, but showing off to be seen by people. This is making an association with Allah, who's the only one that the act of worship should be done for, right? So why is this issue of harming someone else a greater form of dhulm than just foregoing your own individual responsibility? Why do you think? I'll give you a hint. I quote a hadith for you, then maybe this will help you. There's a hadith that many scholars say that it goes to the grade of Hassan, that it says, إن الغيبة أشد من الزنا. that backbiting is worse than zina.
Everything runs private and one's public, but you're outing somebody else to the public.
Continue. That's good, no right to continue.
I mean, so that it could have like a ripple domino effect that will continue the harm of the
Yes.
person.
Yes, yes. When we harm someone, or willing to do harm to ourselves, so let me explain the hadith and go back to what you're saying, what you said is correct. So, the hadith is, and surely backbiting is worse than zina. If there is someone who's a zani, or a zaniya, and they stop committing zina and make tawbah, that's between them and Allah will forgive them. If we backbite someone, just saying astaghfirullah is not enough, because you've actually done harm to a person. And Allah is al-Ghafur, but He is also al-Muqsid. He is the one who will bring about justice. And ultimate justice is on the day of judgment. There's another problem that activists fall into. There is the expectation of expecting ultimate justice in this dunya. This is a false expectation. Prime example today, where that cop, that white female, walked in that house and killed an unarmed African-American man, and then got sentenced to only 10 years in prison, and she may only do a couple of years and get out on good behavior and get parole for taking that man's life. Is that justice? But ultimate justice with Allah is with them. No one's getting away with anything. No one can work the system. There is no double standard with Allah. Right? So going back to this, if a person is committing zina and they make tawbah, say astaghfirullah wa atubu ilayh. They don't go back to it, and they have azm. They are steadfast, and of course, some scholars say there are 5 steps to tawbah, but at least minimum 3, and that, which is having remorse in the heart, okay, and turning away from the sin, asking forgiveness, and turning away is the second step. And the third step is having determination of not going back to it, which means avoiding those things that led us to do the sin to begin with. This is the 3 basic steps of tawbah. So, but if we backbite someone, going back to this hadith, not only do we have to ask Allah's forgiveness, we have to try to get forgiveness from that person. Because as Allah is the all-forgiver, He's also all-just. And all debts will be paid on Yom Hisab. All debts will be paid. All justice will be given on that day. And anyone who's been treated unjustly will be given justice that day. That's why everyone wants justice, justice, justice. As Sheikh Hamza says, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf, may Allah preserve him, we won't be saying justice, justice. We'll be wanting rahmah, rahmah, rahmah. We'll be wanting mercy. None of us will want justice for ourselves is what we've done in this dunya. We all want mercy. Because if all of us got what we justly deserved, we'd all be in trouble. Starting with your poor brother right here. We'd all be in trouble. Okay? So even with woman injustice, the greatest injustice is shirk. Which we mentioned 2 different shades, then harming other people, right? And then also then the harm that we do to ourselves. And again, we discussed the issues of related to the parameters set by Allah, who's the one who sets justice and al-haq. We already talked about, again, just for your notes, again, there is a clear distinction between human rights and civil rights. They are not one and the same. And we'll get to this more in upcoming classes, but we should not be advocating on behalf of things as so-called civil rights that are against human rights given by the divine. They go against that. Human rights and civil rights aren't the same. Legality does not necessarily equal morality. And we know that our morality is set by the divine. And then again, truth versus feelings, that just because we feel something is an injustice doesn't necessarily make it not to be just. When we gave the parameters earlier relating to the Shari definition of justice and non-Shari. Okay? Questions? How am I supposed to present the concept of divine justice in a way that is palatable to non-Muslims? Maybe this is a trick question. Reconciling divine justice through a secular lens. So this is the first thing we have to get clear in our minds. From our framework, we're talking about justice, is that Islam as the basis will not align with some secular beliefs and norms. All right? So it should never be our goal. Like, we don't want to push anyone off. We don't want to alienate people. When we're talking about issues of justice and our framework, our maqsad should not be for them to accept us. That should not be our desire. That should not be our goal. We present what we present in a very refined way and in the wisest way as possible, but it is not that we're seeking their acceptance. Let me reframe what I said. I think I said the opposite way. We're not seeking their acceptance in the process. And Allah told us in the Quran. He told us to our beloved sallallahu alayhi wa sallam in Medina. Right? Because in that society, there were Jews of different tribes. There were Christians that came through trade. There were hypocrites. There were polytheists that came through there. And then what did Allah tell them? وَلَنْ تَرْضَى عِنْدَكَ يَهُودُ وَالنَّصَارَى حَتَّى تَتَّبِعَ مِلَّتَهُم. Never will all the Jews or all the Christians be pleased with you until you follow their way. Right? This is in land in Arabic means never. Like no possibility in the future. Never ever will all of them be pleased with you until you give up your way and you follow them. Right? The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, he said, إِنَّ الْإِسْلَامَ بَدَأَ قَرِيبًا سِيَعُودُ كَمَا بَدَأَ قَرِيبًا فَتُوبَى لِلْغُرَبَاءِ. Surely Islam began strange. It shall return as it began, strange. So glad tidings to the strangers. And in one riwayah he's asked, and who are the strangers? And there are those who seek to reform or set things right amongst the people. These are the strangers. So if something is status quo, if something is accepted in the dominant culture, then it's not gharib, it's not strange. Right? It's not gharib. Then that'd be mashhur. That's something that's popular. That's something that everyone knows it, it's popular, right? It's accepted. But if it's gharib, it is something that is not accepted readily by status quo. It seems strange. It seems strange. The second is, we live in a pluralistic society, and we're discussing these things with people who aren't Muslims. And living in a pluralistic society, it allows us to express our beliefs. And it allows us to practice our beliefs in this pluralistic society. But going back, we have to have the courage to do that. We have to understand our rights, and we have the courage to do that. See, these go hand in hand. And I think that many Muslims feel it as if we actually don't have the right to practice our beliefs or say what we have to say. Now, of course, if we say what we have to say, if we say what we believe, then there may be some socio-political consequences, right? But when we stand up for truth and justice, then we're guaranteed to have some consequences. Like being a Muslim, like being Muslim doesn't mean middle class respectability or having comfort in this society. It's not what it means to be successful and be a Muslim. Like some of us have gotten it twisted. Like we think that middle class acceptability and comfort is what it means to be accepted. I mean to be successful in the United States of America. There's supposed to be some challenge, right? Imam Shafi'i, rahmatullahi alayhi, one of our great imams. He said, if there is one surah in the Quran that people contemplate about deeply, it would suffice to God. One surah. It's the second shortest surah in the Quran, words. Anyone know what this surah is? I gave it away.
What did you say? The small
The surah that Imam Shafi'i mentioned, that if people contemplated this one surah, it would be enough to guide them. It would suffice to them.
خلاص.
Fatiha.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق وتواصوا بالصبر. So Allah starts off swearing an oath by us. And this can have more than one meaning. And only Allah knows the full meaning of this, what he means by us. Surely the human being is losing. And then he gives 4 characteristics. One who believes, has iman, then enjoins those beliefs with righteous actions. And as Shafi'i said this too, as well as Imam Malik. Al-Iman qawlun wa amal. Al-Iman qawlun wa amal. Faith is in speech, proclamation, and in deed. Speech and deed. Iman, then amal, then the third, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ. Those who are enjoining or involved in mutual enjoyment of haq, what is true, what are rights, right? Meaning that the person is able to stand up and talk about truth, and also they are able to be receptive and they're told about the truth, or when they're not being just. See, it goes both ways. You just can't tell people about the truth, justice, 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 but then you can't be told about justice, right, for yourself, or when we step out of line. Then the fourth is وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, and those who are involved in the mutual enjoining of patient perseverance. Patient perseverance. And our scholars have said that وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, there's a logic to this, because once someone stands up for their belief and openly practices their belief and stands up for justice, they will have adversaries from the people of Baltimore. Then there has to be patient perseverance. That you don't give up your principles. You don't compromise your principles seeking to be accepted or seeking to get the heat off you. But the loss of the haq, but the loss of the sabr. And that takes, of course, courage. And I've said this. Our beloved Dr. Bilal Wears, as we Allah preserve him, said that if you look back and say the lives of Al-Anbiya, you basically will see that all the prophets of God were counterculture. They were counterculture. Now, leading others, we are in a time of fitna. We are in a time of mass confusion. We are in a time of mass confusion. When al-ma'lum ad-din bid-darura, even the Muslims are confused about those basic necessities of the deen that are obligatory. Even the Muslims today, including in activism circles, are confused about some very basic things. Some very basic things that any Muslim who leaves 5th grade should know. Very basic things. Like the intoxicants issue, that's something that we all should know about, right? You know, on my website, as an example, every year on Ramadan, I can tell what people Google and get hits to my website at elwali.com. Right at the end of Sha'ban, and coming through Ramadan, how people, I wrote something maybe about 10 years ago about the impermissibility of smoking marijuana during Ramadan, is people Googling, can I smoke weed in Ramadan? They're looking for a fatwa or something. I guess they went to my website and they thought they were going to roast or something. Like, first of all, even if you smoke tobacco during fasting hours, that close your fast to begin with, much less smoking some weed. But Muslims are confused about something that small, right? So just imagine the other things we're going with social justice about, using all these different alphabets, so-called solidarity, so-called intersectionality. You know, just imagine if like we're confused on some of those basic things, right? What about these other issues? So we have to also understand that if we're not straight on our definitions of justice, we may, with good intentions, be used as a tool of helping normalize things that go outside of the Sharia. And unfortunately, it's happening in activism circles as well as in political circles, and I gave an example already. How is it possible to stand up for those that are being oppressed without giving them a platform to promote their cause? Right? So we're talking about justice. And I said this later on in this presentation, but I'm going to say it right now. I'm sure some of you heard me say it before. Justice doesn't mean just us. Justice, they almost sound the same phonetically, huh? Justice doesn't mean just us. So, when we're talking about principles of truth and standing up for justice, it is about human rights and human dignity. It's not just simply about identity politics. If someone's a Muslim or someone's not a Muslim. Or someone my gender or someone outside my gender. Right? Oh, why have to be for gender justice? Does gender justice entail a misandry? Misandry is opposite of misogyny. Misandry means being anti-male. Right? Like, we have to be careful. And words matter. We have to be, again, we have to be very careful about our words. And this is why, and as I say, and this is a challenge for American Muslims. I don't have all the answers for Muslims in the West in general. But we have to use our own language and our own way of expressing things. Right? And we just can't copy everyone else's nomenclature or everyone else's words. Because when a person comes up with a word, they have a system of thought or a worldview behind it. And once we start using that word, we get caught up in a certain framework that has been developed for us. Then we end up being enslaved to that framework. Actually, Dr. George Lakoff wrote a book about this, and in the introduction, it's all you need to read. I ain't the whole book. It's called Don't Think of an Elephant. It's a book about framing. Right? We get caught up in people's frames. But the frame could even be outside the sentence. It could be outside, it could be one word. It can be a word that was coined. Right? Marriage equality. I mean, sounds good. Sounds good. Does that term really mean equality? Right? Does that framework mean justice? And I'll get to that later on, because actually I got on one of these Luthi activists about that term. I was asked about that the night the Ferguson riots, the Ferguson uprising. I was in Central Michigan University giving a talk, and I was asked about, how come we don't support marriage equality. And I flipped it back on them. I said, we're all about marriage equality and being in relationships with who we love, the consensual adults. I said, why is your movement against my First Amendment right for polygyny? If it's about equality underneath the law. So why are you against Mormons? Why are you against Muslims? Why can't I love who I love? At the time I was single. Like, but I'm just saying, I was using this as an example, right? But we'll get into that more later on. Have foresight, seek to understand agendas and trade-off at play, including the potential to champion that which is blameworthy. And we'll go over that more as we get into the difference between coalitions and allies or allyship. And again, I said that justice does not mean just us as Muslims. Should we even be engaged in these types of discussions, such as separation of families, gender identity in the workplace, where we have to be specific and look at our framework. We can use our own epistemology for what justice means when we look at all these issues. And then as the saying goes, the devil's in the details. Because something sounds good on the surface, right? But maybe there's a problem with it, right? Issues that specifically affect Muslims should not be our only framework, again, for understanding justice activism. We should stand up for justice for all people, even if it's against Muslims. And again, every issue that affects humankind is a Muslim issue, and this is why we are described as khulafa or khala'ifat al-ard in the Quran, that we are the vicegerents in this earth, in this lower realm, and we have a responsibility to not only be just with human beings, to be just with all creation, to be just with animals. Right, you know, the Prophet talked about this a lot, but so even about not overloading the camel, right? That we have to be just even with the animals that we use. In conclusion, let me also say this. When we're talking about justice, I mentioned we are the khulafa or khala'ifat al-ard. But just as there's the dunya, there's a malakut, there's a celestial realm. And the unseen is what governs the seen. The unseen governs the seen. Right? So we have to respect the unseen reality in this seen world. But again, we have to understand it is the unseen reality that governs the seen. It's our responsibility about how we act, and our activism is in the dunya, in this lower realm. But the malakut is a higher authority than the dunya. So we have to always remember that, and we'll get into more specifics later. Perhaps we even talk about this term racism that has been misdefined and sometimes overused. We'll talk about that as well, because there's a problem with the critical race theory definition of racism. We might get into that a little bit. That's the end of this class. Do we have any questions relating to what was going on? Any comments? Any comments from the viewing audience?
What are some instances where you have to take like you know what divine justice is in the situation, but you're trying to translate it properly to a non-Muslim audience? Any examples you can give where it's gone over well for you? And others where maybe it hasn't, and that's just,
Okay.
you know.
Well, see, let me say this. There's a general public that I talk a certain way, and there's certain activist circles, or so-called woke people, right? So the conversation that I have with regular people that I deal with, or in certain areas, like well on TV, that's a different way that I talk in so-called activist circles, especially among so-called woke. And this is a saying that we have a hadith about this. You speak to people according to where their mindsets are at. So that's the first rule of public speaking anyway. You speak to your audience. So I wouldn't, if I'm talking about an issue of justice on a particular issue, I wouldn't even get to this framework come up. This is divine justice, or like the Sharia calls me towards this. I'll give you an example of an issue that I talked about, and I explained to some people in the Muslim community why I was involved with the issue. So it was about 8 or 9 years ago. There was a young woman, African American, not Muslim, who was killed in Dearborn Heights. Her name was Renisha Bedran. You can even see me talk about this on Democracy Now! Any good. So, Renisha McBride got into a car wreck. She ran to someone's home for help, and she went and knocked on the door, and there was a white male in there, and he said he was scared, and he took his gun and shot through the door, in the screen door, and shot her, and she died. Then the Dearborn police came, and they took a police report. And they didn't even arrest him until like days later. He was sitting at home chilling, watching like TV, eating pizza, like literally, right? Then eventually he got arrested, and he got charged with like, he didn't get charged with like first degree murder. He got charged with a lesser charge. So, some people say, well, why is CARE Michigan involved in this, and this person's not even a Muslim, right? So, when I was asked about this amongst some people in the community, why are you wasting community resources? And I said, well, doesn't the Quran says, "Men qatala nasa bil ghayri nasa fasad bil ard," in the qatala nasa jami'an, that whoever kills an innocent person, isn't it like killing all of humankind? And if it isn't for like saving one life, isn't it like saving all of humankind? Like, isn't this in our book? Like, doesn't our tradition, doesn't our religion call us that we have a divine obligation upon us to stand for the rights of people, whether they're Muslim or not? Like, of course. But actually, I was asked that question by non-Muslims. Why are you involved in that? Like, you know, oh, so is she Muslim? Oh, well, you know, well, why are you involved? Like NAACP anyway. And by the way, the NAACP didn't even get involved. So, I don't know if that's answered your question, but when I talked about on TV, I didn't mention anything about the Quran. When I went on Democracy Now! Or Fox 2 News, I didn't mention nothing. I didn't quote any hadith, I didn't quote any ayat of the Quran. I didn't say anything about the sacred law and what the objectives of the maqasid, what the objectives of our sacred law is. But we took a stand for it. But that goes back to justice isn't just us. And also I would say to the viewing audience too is that if we think that we can just only stand for our own issues and not stand for other people and expect Allah's help, we're sadly mistaken. We're sadly mistaken. No, we're mistaken. It's not prophetic. It's not prophetic. Any other questions?
I have a question. You mentioned earlier that we should, or you emphasized on not falling into using the secular terms or buzzwords that now everyone is using, because it has different definitions all, and we need to leverage or use our own kind of terminologies and finding them. But how would you engage in discussions with someone who is outside of obviously the Muslim community? Who do they have, like they have different definitions? I feel like you need to agree on a basis of agreement before you engage in a discussion. And I'm going to give you an example. Usually at work I do avoid talking about any political, religious affiliation or views, right? Because that's recommended. But when the issue with Kashmir happened, I had a conversation with a coworker, and basically the first thing that was said is religion should be not part of the government. It's a very private thing. Even it should not be visible to the outside world. And I felt like the conversation ended there because we're not agreeing on the kind of the basics. Where can we take that conversation?
Okay. Well, first of all, it's okay to have disagreement.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I know you understand. Just to be clear, again, we can talk in general terms to people, and without using specific nomenclature and specific words. I thought you were talking because there are certain words that start off one way and they evolve into meaning something else, right? And I'll use an example in a moment, inshallah. But going back to that broader issue, I would just talk more about basic principles that can be agreed upon, right? I'm not even sure, how did religion get brought into Kashmir as far as like religion should be in the government?
Because it was an Indian person, and it was like, from the viewpoint of.
Modi is a Hindu nationalist.
Well, the thing is, like, basically they're saying that Kashmir has been under, like, the religious Sharia kind of thing, that they're not evolving, that kind of the opposite viewpoint, which is really upsetting.
Well, you can talk the language of democracy to them.
Yeah.
And of course, because if people have the right of self-determination, that's their land, and they should be able to come together and run their land according to the norms and means that they feel is fine for them. And I would actually go back and challenge that person, where did you get this worldview from that secular democracy is the only way in which a people can rule a country? And I would retort, you got that from your former British colonializers. That's you got that from. That's not something that evolved, that came out of Indian culture or the history of India. That's the, well, I'm not going to racialize language, but that's the colonizers' worldview that was imposed and put that mindset. So you said, is that the only way people can govern themselves? Right? You can even point at America, right? Like America has just started getting the democratic project right somewhat, only in the 70s. Right? So you're talking about, it took America almost 200 years to get it somewhat right. Right? But going back to the terminology, so intersectionality is one of those words. That's a loaded term. Intersectionality actually started off from what's called the women's movement, where black women who were marginalized from the white women, black women were marginalized in feminist movement, right? So black women wanted to develop a discourse in which their being women and being marginalized in society was connected or intersectional with their blackness, which was the identity that suffered more brutal oppression, right? So there's one identity that causes more wrath in the dominant society, but there's also another identity that intersects with it. So that's where the term intersectionality came from. It came from the women's movement. Now when you hear intersectionality, the term has been hijacked, just like other terms have been hijacked. Even symbols. The rainbow flag started from Jesse Jackson's Rainbow Push, Rainbow Coalition. First, Fred Hampton used it, who was one of the Black Panthers in the late 60s. He was killed, assassinated by the FBI with the Chicago police in 1969. He used it, and Jesse Jackson from Chicago used it with Rainbow Push. It took the civil rights community's symbols and language, and they used it for the homosexual agenda. And the homosexual agenda took that term intersectionality, so now you're talking about being intersectional. It is, okay, so we know we have to stand up for the rights of the blacks, Latinos, the Muslims, and the LGBTQ. That's intersectionality, right? So that's why I don't even use that term intersectionality. It's a low term, right? So that's what I'm saying. Like, there's certain things I just avoid, I just use another term. Or just talking general terms. You can talk in general terms, right? And you can do it not being offensive, right? So we use the word luti, right, in Arabic. Luti, literally translated from English, doesn't mean gay, it literally means sodomite, one who does liwat. So, but I'm not going to go to someone and say, oh, I don't invite, sodomites to rallies. That's offensive, right? I wouldn't say that wouldn't be. I mean, we don't have to be offensive at the same time we can stand for our beliefs and our values. Like I wouldn't go out and publicly say, 20 years or something like that. Can I answer your question? Well, if that is all, then the next class that we have will be at the Islamic Center of Ann Arbor in 2 weeks. And that will be going into the religious obligation for social justice activism or justice activism. And we will touch on there the different layers of enjoying the good and forbidding evil. Not just what is obligatory, but also what is highly recommended, it's called mustahab. So we have what is wajib or fard. I don't have if we use fard and wajib. What is obligatory and what is recommended, highly recommended,